For starters, my name is Dave Gould. I have a couple of hats at the university, but specific to this one, I'm an administrator at the Belin-Blank Center, who is really supporting what we're doing today. We're really grateful to be part of Mission Creek Festival. We've been in this community for a long, long time, and we love the Mission Creek Festival being part of our community. So we're thankful that they asked us to join them, and I'm really thrilled to have such a huge. My gosh, we had 100 seats up, so now we are well over that. So this is really wonderful, and especially shout out to Regina, who let the track team out, man, to come here. So thanks for that. A couple of just quick things. If you take a look in your chairs, and those that are just getting new chairs, you could come up and see us afterwards, and I can supply you with it. There's 3 things on your chair. Number one, there's a brochure for the Belin-Blank Center, and one of the things that we really would love to have you do is take a look at that so that you understand, not only how it fits into today, but how the mission and the different programs that the Belin-Blank Center offers. So you have that on your chair. The second thing you have is a postcard for Dan's book that's coming out. Dan Lerner, our guest today. If you're inspired, which I believe you'll be, this will be a way that you can take that with you and know how to learn more, read more, and obviously, kind of have something that you can hold that can kind of keep this going in your life. The third thing is a thing for the window, for the podcast. And what we have started as an initiative at the Belin-Blank Center is we are launching a podcast that I'll let Nick give a little deeper idea of what that is, but the quick version is it's really looking at it's the talent development. It's kind of living our highest lives. It's moving ourselves forward towards a larger world. And speaking in the framework of education and learning. And we've interviewed Tony Wagner, President Michael Crow from Arizona State University, Natalie Merchant's on our list, a host of really wonderful people. And in May 1st, we'll be launching that. So if you are interested and want to be able to know when it comes out and be able to subscribe, the thing that you have is a way to deposit your email address, and we can send you just a little note to let you know that the first one's up, and you can take a listen and see what you think. And of course, Dan will be, what we're doing today will be part of that. So this is going to be a podcast. We're going to be recording this, so hopefully that's okay. Nick is going to run questions, and you'll be able to listen in and hopefully mentally take some notes with the idea that the last 15 minutes or so, we're going to just open up the room for questions. The guy in the nice jacket there with the microphone over there will find you, so raise your hand, wait for him to find you in the audience so that we get you recorded and have the question as well as the answer. And let's have a lot of fun and inspiring conversation. I'll make just 2 quick introductions. Again, thank you for the library, Mission Creek, and Belin-Blank Center. My colleague, Josh Jacobs, who is helping me produce this, is right here on my right, if you could thank him. Our host of the show, and when you hear his credentials, you'll know why it's very fitting, is Nick Colangelo, the former director of the Belin-Blank Center and the former dean of the College of Education. And if you could welcome Nick. And I'll let Nick introduce our guests and get things started. So it's all yours, Nick.
My new first name is Former. It's really great to have so many people here. This is exciting. The podcast, The Window, is to take a look at some of the main educational issues, not only in Iowa, but in the nation, and bringing guests who have some real bold ideas about where we should go in education, but also people who are involved in helping others nurture talent to achieve their very best for all of us. And we're hoping that, when people individually grow and flourish, that somehow also collectively we will be a much better community. Today's guest is Dan Lerner. Dan has been a musician. He is a strength-based coach for athletes, for artists, for musicians, and also for Fortune 500 executives. Dan is also an applied positive psychologist, and a positive psychologist means that he focuses on people's strengths as ways that it's our health helps us accomplish more, helps us just be better people in life. Dan is also a faculty member at New York University, and he teaches what is arguably the most popular course at NYU. It's titled The Science of Happiness. Just the title will get me to register. And also, he is very involved in terms of undergraduate education, and he has a brand new book out. It's called You Thrive, How to Succeed in College and in Life. And you know, just help me welcome this terrific, inspiring person, Dan.
Thank you all. Thank you.
So Dan, welcome to our very first live podcast of the window.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
I want to ask you something. The first time you really came into contact with the exceptional accomplishment, the ability, it's really with your parents. Both
Right.
your parents were professional musicians, and I remember you saying as a little boy that you would kind of hide in the corner and just kind of listen to them playing, you know, kind of observing. And I'm just wondering, what did that little boy observe and learn that is still relevant to you today as a person and also for the work that you do?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. First of all, thank you again for welcoming me here so beautifully and warmly. You know, watching my folks was absolutely my first memory in life. I used to sneak down the stairs after bedtime and hide on the landing and watch my parents play music. As Nick alluded to, my father was in the Pittsburgh Symphony. My mother was a very successful opera singer. And you know, it wasn't just the music making. It was the joy with which they made music. It was the joy with which they made music together. And being able to watch two people do something at such a high level, to do something at kind of a world-class level, but also to take such great pleasure in it, that combination was really special to me. So when I think about the idea of excellence, expertise, success for really anyone in here, whether we're talking musicians or athletes here in the front row, no matter, or academicians, teachers, no matter what it is we're doing, the idea that we can be both very successful and also have great well-being is something that has stayed with me ever since those first memories.
Let me follow up on that because part of what we know, I mean, it seems like to be successful, you've got to work pretty hard at it, you got to put in your hours, but it seems that some people are successful and are fairly happy about life, and they really enjoy their success, and then there's others who are very successful, but don't seem to be happy about life or enjoying that success. And can you shed some light on how you see those two differences and why?
Sure. So I went into the music business. First job out of college, I was an agent. I represented talent. And that divide became very apparent to me, that there were people who were very successful on stage and very successful off stage in their lives. And there were also people who were very successful on stage and not happy away from the stage. And that was a real challenge. So when I began to study this, my time in the business, when I went back to school, it became apparent it wasn't just with musicians. It wasn't just with my clients. And if we look around our culture, I think we can see folks on the one side, let's take a Steve Jobs, for example, who's incredibly successful by definition. This is, you know, one of the great change agents, entrepreneurs, brilliant minds, creatives in history. But was he happy? That's a whole other question. As opposed to someone like a Richard Branson, who is enormously successful as an entrepreneur, as a creative, so on and so forth, but he makes time for his family. He makes time for things that are important to him, makes time to help other people in the world. And if we look across fields, whether it's Kanye West on this side and Maya Angelou on this side, if it's Bobby Knight, the coach, on this side, and Pete Carroll, the coach, on this side, you see a really sharp divide. But you're right. For many people, it seems that they feel if they're going to become great at something, and it doesn't have to be at that level, by the way. It's whatever we do in life. Where they feel they want to become great, they need to sacrifice everything else. Right? There's no time for family if you're going to be great at something. There's no time for hobbies if you're going to be great at something. There's no time for spiritual pursuits necessarily if you're going to be great at something. Everything else has to go by the wayside because it requires so much work. But what we're seeing in research is that we actually have an advantage when we cultivate, say, positive emotions, when we have positive relationships, when we have meaning in our life, when we're engaged in what it is that we do. For college students, higher levels of positive emotion often translates into higher GPAs. So if you're so stressed out at school that you're not happy, you're actually it's more challenging to achieve what you're trying to achieve. We see it with athletes as well. We see it with musicians as well. We see it across the board. Relationships, you're going to get stressed out when you work hard. That's part of becoming excellent. But if you have no one to turn to, if you don't have a relationship, or you can say, I'm a little stressed out right now, I'm a little worried, then you have nowhere to kind of alleviate that stress. So what we're seeing is when we cultivate the positive, it's not that we're working any less hard. It's just that hard work is more sustainable. It feels less burdensome on us.
You know, you talk a lot, Dan, about finding your passion, you know, what you love to do. So how do we go about finding our passion? You know, is there a way for us to think about what does it mean to be passionately involved with something?
And you know, and Nick's bringing up something which is really essential to the previous question, which is the idea of being great or being great and happy. And when we look at studies of passion, there are two very distinctive ways to look at passion, or at least there are two different ways to experience and explore passion. One is what we call obsessive passion, and that is when it's driven by extrinsic motivators. We do it because our parents want us to do it, because the status is high, because we do it for the money, rather than we do it because we love it. And when we do it for all those other reasons, we find the research shows that we have higher levels of negative emotion. We're more stressed out. We tend to injure ourselves because we overtrain, for example. We burn out at a much higher rate. Well, when we look at the harmonious passion, pursuing something for the sake of itself, because we love it, we get up in the morning and think, that's what I want to do. When we do that, we have higher levels of positive emotion. We have more positive relationships because we make time for them, right? We have other hobbies in our life because we know those things are important. And we even have greater memory retention. We have more engagement. So it's a huge difference. When we're talking about the key question, which is how do we find a passion? You know, a lot of people think that passions are thunderbolt moments, right? You see something in your life and boom, I know now I need to become a doctor, go to Doctors Without Borders. I know now that I need to give back to my community in a very specific way, or I know now that I'm supposed to do X. But the research shows that the majority of passions are not found in thunderbolt moments. They're found in pursuing something that's simply of interest to you. So for students in college, for example, don't expect necessarily that you need to know what it is you're going to do for the rest of your life as a passion. If you're interested in one course, take that course, right? Because that might lead to a second course. That might lead to a major, because you're pursuing something that you're genuinely interested in. Passions, we find, generally take about 3 years to develop. I know it's kind of weird to put a number on that and say, well, how do you know 3 years? But that's what we've found in the studies. And even my little boy is a gymnast, and there are athletes here, and it's interesting because he used to say, I do gymnastics. And about 3 years in, and he was doing it at a very high level, he changed the way he said that to say, I'm a gymnast. And when we start identifying with something in that capacity, then we know that we sort of started on that road of passion.
I think this is an important message because I've talked to a lot of parents who wonder how much does their son or daughter have to give up in order to really pursue something at the excellence level. And I think what you're saying is you can really have it both, that, you know, if you don't give up relationships and so forth. And it's a good reminder because it seems like people have examples of where someone gave up everything and then it all didn't quite turn out.
Yeah. And by the way, I just point out and add to that, you know, that people who pursue things in that obsessive way, one thing and one thing only, for parents out there or for students out there who are thinking this is the way it has to be done, the rates of burnout goes through the roof. So can you imagine helping your kid pursue something they love or something that you think is great for 10, 12, 15 years, and one day they come to you and say, I actually can't do this anymore. I'm done. Like, I'm tired of it. I've done way too much of it. I need to step away. They haven't had the support and where are they going to go next? They don't know what else to do. That's the unhappy part, I think.
You know, you had an interesting story in your book about Roger Bannister, who was the first person to ever break the 4-minute mile. And at that time, it was seen as impossible, but he did it in 1954. But the amazing thing that you bring out is that after he broke that mile in that same year, about another 4 or 5 times, that 4-minute mile was broken. And it's this whole thing where it lifted a mindset. And you talk about mindsets, about how they can limit us, and how they can also enhance us. And I think that's really interesting. If you could talk a bit about how mindsets work on how we see ourselves.
Sure. Well, I mean, we all have the Bannister example is terrific, right? Because everyone said it couldn't be done. It's impossible. And as Nick points out, as soon as that record gets broken, almost 40 people in the course of the next year break it. High schoolers now break it. But why couldn't they break it before? What kept them from breaking a 4-minute mile? I'm not saying it's easy. I certainly can't run a 4-minute mile. I can't run a 8-minute mile. But you know, it's not an easy thing. But all of a sudden, that barrier's lifted, and we realize that something's possible. So we allow ourselves to push a little further, knowing that that might be something that we can do. It's one of the reasons why exemplars are so important. Why people who we look up to are so important. Because we look at, if everyone here thinks about who they look up to, who an exemplar is in their lives. The odds are, and it doesn't have to be a famous person, it could be a parent. For many of my students, it is a parent or a grandparent. And one of the things is that those people, they've gone beyond what we think is possible. They've loved us more than we thought was possible, even though we've been little idiots when we were young. They have, if it is in sport, we've seen people do extraordinary things, in music, extraordinary things. So it resets the bar, which is so important. Now, another aspect of mindset, I think, and this speaks to what we were talking about before, was we see this in kids a lot, but it's certainly applicable for everybody, is that idea of, do you have a fixed mindset or do we have a growth mindset? A fixed mindset is that mindset where, let's say we do poorly in a test, we don't do well in a meeting, and we think, well, I can't get any better. This is my limit. I'm just not bright enough to do any better. So what happens as a result? We basically stop trying. We've just lowered our bar and accepted the fact that we'll never be any better than this. And that's a really challenging thing. But when we look at a growth mindset, and this is work with Carol Dweck out at Stanford, when we look at a growth mindset, it's the idea that if I work harder, I can get better. That there are barriers that I can break through. And we have that, it's much more likely that we'll be able to keep moving, growing, learning, so on and so forth.
My guess is there's a lot of people here who are here as parents or grandparents. So what can a parent do, assuming that you're not born with a particular mindset, but if your son or daughter has a fairly fixed mindset, what kinds of things can you do or say to encourage the building of a more flexible growth mindset? Yeah,
and that's kind of the million-dollar question, right? Fortunately, there seems to be an answer. At least research says there's an answer, so let me share it with you. So how do we praise our children when they do well? And that's where it all happens. If we praise our kids for doing well, for winning, then they will learn to value winning, and winning only. If we praise them for being smart, then they'll want to show everyone that they are smart. If we praise them for being good looking, right, then that's what it's all about for them. But if we praise them for the things that they can control, like you can't control winning. I mean, you can work hard, but you can't necessarily assume that there's no one out there better than you. You can't necessarily control how smart you are, but you can work hard, right? So when we praise them for the hard work that they do, we praise them for doing something that they love, doing something that they're passionate about. We praise them for their values, for being a great teammate. Then what they learn to do is strive to do more of that. And that's the way we end up getting better. I mean, there are lots of factors, but when it comes to improving our performance in anything, it's about working hard. And so when we praise them for that, it's no longer, at least it's less about winning, and it's more about what can I do that will help improve my circumstances, and that's growth.
You mentioned about working hard, and there's this concept of deliberate practice out there that, some people believe you're born with some fairly rare talent, and then others, like a Malcolm Gladwell, will say it really is all environment and so forth. Can you shed some light on where you stand? I mean, you've worked with a lot of high-end performers. Where does the idea of practice versus kind of genetics or, innate ability, how do the two mesh? And especially for you, what have you seen?
Yeah. I wish it were as simple as being able to say, this is the formula. But in another way, that's the beautiful thing about realizing excellence or expertise, is that there's not just one way. There are elements that we all need to consider, one of which is clearly working really, really hard. Now, the idea of deliberate practice that Nick brings up, that Malcolm Gladwell highlights in his book Outliers, is that there's a very, very specific way to practice so that you can improve. It involves having a mentor. It involves getting feedback, immediate feedback on a regular basis, setting very distinctive goals. So it's not, I'm going to play through this whole piece of music. I'm going to play one measure over and over and over. And I'm going to work on nothing but precision with my fingers. And that's it. Right? So it's almost like forced evolution, the idea that I'm pushing myself past what I would be doing otherwise. But the idea that it's only that is too simple. And for a while, that's what people were believing, that anyone can achieve anything if they work hard. Challenge is, if you're really looking forward to playing pro ball and you're 5 feet tall, the odds are slim that you're going to make it no matter how hard you work. If you're really looking forward to being that great musician, you have to understand that there are various levels of talent that people have in a way that they're born with. Let's say, again, a lot of it's physical. If you are a pianist and you have particularly long fingers, you might have an advantage, right? So let's think about our upbringing. If you are raised in a family we're here in Iowa, if you're raised in a family of farmers, right, and you're really interested in farming, then the odds are you have an advantage over someone else who's really interested in farming and lives in New York City. Right? Because you're not getting those conversations every night at the dinner table. You're not getting the hands-on experience. So there are clearly advantages when it comes to environment. But regardless of anything else, that hard work is totally key. It's just not as simple as that. Yeah.
I've heard people say, I've been doing this jogging for 5, 6, 10 years, and yet I'm basically at a sticking point. And I think it's because they're doing the same thing rather than pushing. Right. Dan, you use terms like happiness, optimism, and so forth. In academia, these are fairly squishy terms, okay? Yeah. But you always talk about the science behind these things and the research. So if you could share a bit about what you've learned about the science behind some of these terms, rather than that it's just an intuitive sense that you have.
Well, look, we started studying happiness, I say we, clearly not including myself, back in the 1870s. So when we look at the foundations of psychology, we're studying the human mind. We're studying the human mind when it was dealing with issues like stresses and anxieties and depression and other obstacles to well-being. But we also studied the human mind when it was thriving. What is it about certain people that do well, certain relationships that allow them to thrive? And that was really the case for many, many years until really World War II, when you had this wave of soldiers coming back, or not coming back tragically, but with post-traumatic stress disorder. And their families were dealing with it. And so all the funding shifted to just being able to survive these incredibly challenging circumstances. So between 1960 and 1999, I believe it is, the ratio of studies on negatively oriented psychology to positive was 21-1. You had 45,000 studies of depression. You had about 500 studies on joy. So we didn't understand it. Right. In 99, along comes Martin Seligman, who's the father of positive psychology, and says, listen, we need to get back to studying what it means to thrive, what it means to live a life worth living. Right? And if we're going to do that, we need to study positive emotions and positive relationships and all these other factors as carefully, as with as much scientific integrity as we've studied everything else, or else it'll always be squishy. And that's what we've really focused on doing for almost the last 20 years. And so we have these researchers, these scientists at very prestigious universities who are looking at positive emotions very distinctively. Let's take an example that we share often is, let's take a group of doctors with at least 3 years of medical experience, and we'll give them 50 symptoms to diagnose. Right now, one group is given the symptoms and they're allowed to just begin. The other group is given a bag of candy, right? They're made to laugh. Their spirits are raised. They're not allowed to eat the candy because that would wreak havoc with the study. But they're given a bag of candy. They're made to be happy. And in that study, we found that those doctors diagnosed about 20% more accurately. So we've looked at that with college students. We've seen that college students at University of Maryland primed in the same way. Think of something that makes you happy for the next 30 seconds. Better memory retention with foreign languages. Primed again. They test higher on assessments of creativity. So we're finding the brain works very differently, and we're able to look at it and find that being not primed, or being primed with negative emotions, think about an unhappy memory, and their performance drops even further. So at this point, we have so much research that we're building that we feel really secure that it's getting a little less squishy every day. Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I do appreciate is that so much of your work is based on research. You give examples, and it's not just, a few case studies, but larger numbers. You got interested in the undergraduate experience, and as I look out there, I think we have some undergrads here, a few that are going to be undergrads, a few wish that they were back to undergrad years. But this is that 4 or 5 year period, late teens, early 20s, that has really gotten your attention. So can you talk a bit about why is this so important, and what do you see involved as some of the essential issues in the undergraduate experience?
Right. Well, let me start with the first question, which is why is it so important? So for years, I worked with very high-achieving folks in an array of fields. And basically, the phone call was, hey, how you doing? My name is X. I'm super successful, and I'm really unhappy. And so we get to work with them, and it was sort of about changing their routines, changing their habits when it came to what are they focusing on? Are they thinking about those things that they're grateful for in their lives, for example? I mean, how are they tracking those things that do make them happy? And it's a much greater challenge when you're 35 and you're set in your ways and you've been successful. So when I get to work with college students, as I say to them, with no offense to using the term, but I'm like, I get you guys when you're young, which means that you haven't formed the routines and habits that you're going to apply as firmly as a lot of my clients. So I get to work with them and help them understand ways to integrate well-being into their path. Now, it's particularly important right now because what we're finding with college students is that it's becoming a greater challenge for them to thrive in school. Right. We have 4 million college students who are starting school this year. The 2015 Gallup poll shows that 90% of them have said that they have felt overwhelming stress in the past year. 45% of them have said they have felt, quote, very sad in the past year. And 31% of them have said that they've dealt with work-debilitating depression in the last year. Now think about this. One of if not the greatest accomplishment for many college students is getting into college. And yet, they're suffering. If you Google surviving college, you get 90 million plus returns. If you Google thriving in college, you get about 3% of that, because people are just trying to survive at this point. So what we're finding is that the barriers to well-being are growing, and the opportunities for well-being are becoming increasingly challenging. But this is such a wonderful time of being able to form those habits. Learning what they can do, learning what the resources are, learning how they can really have a great 4 years, that we're lucky to be able to get them at this point.
I know one of the things you talked about the undergraduate experience is that you got so many damn decisions to make and so forth. Can you talk a bit more about just the kinds of things that come out that are thrown at you, especially freshman year, which is kind of like the brand new part of the experience for most people?
Well, college is arguably the greatest change that any 18-year-old has experienced thus far in their life. Not for all, clearly, but for many. And let's think about it for a second. Right? When you're in high school, you know exactly what's going to happen for almost every moment of your day. You're going to wake up, maybe you'll hit the snooze bar a couple times. But you're going to wake up, you're going to go downstairs, your breakfast is probably going to be made, and if it's not made, you have like one choice. It's cornflakes, or it's whatever it is. You know where you're going to be first period, you know where you're going to be second period, you know where you're going after school to practice or whatever it might be. And then basically you come home and you do it all over again the next day. The day you leave for college, everything, all of that disappears. Your support system disappears. Your friends aren't necessarily there. Your folks aren't necessarily there. You don't know where you're going to be having breakfast, who you're going to be having breakfast with. You don't even know who you're going to be sleeping with that first night of college. And by that, I mean your roommate, by the way. So unless you have a wild, wild first night. But so everything changes. And it's not just that you're not sure. It's that you have enormous array of choice. So if you decide to go here for breakfast, let's take a different example. If you decide to take this class, it's not like you're choosing between bio and AP bio. You're choosing between like 47 different classes. If you think about majors, I think one school in the country last year had 251 majors. So it's not just you having to choose, it's all the ones you're leaving behind. The moment you choose a course, you've just left 50 others behind. And so when you get into that course, no matter how wonderful it is, those tough moments, you're thinking, man, maybe I should have taken that other course, or that other course, or that other course. So all of these overwhelming changes happen, and an increasing number now that schools offer more. And as a result, it's hard to choose. And when you do choose, the choices you make, and this is what we're finding in the research, the choices you make, you don't even enjoy as much, even when you do make them, because in the back of your mind, you're thinking, I could have done something else.
Yeah. Let's stay with the undergraduate years for a second. You're a faculty member at New York University. Your course, The Science of Happiness, clearly attracts hundreds of students. I went online and read some of the comments that they make about you as an instructor, and it really grabs at the heart, the impact that you have. As someone who's really committed to education, how do you prepare for teaching? What do you believe are the essentials of excellence in teaching?
That's a tough question. So I think there are a number of essentials that I'd bring up. First is clearly, well, I shouldn't say first, in no particular order, let me put it that way. Communication is totally key. How are you going to communicate an idea to a student, to an 18 to 24-year-old? Because you can take the greatest science in the world, the most groundbreaking, fascinating for us science in the world, and if it's delivered the wrong way, it'll bounce off them. Right? They won't soak it in, they won't be able to apply it, and that's a real challenge. So I would say first and foremost is having responsible science. But then, very, very short, following directly after is how do we communicate this to them? So what we do in this course is we make sure that we focus on the 18 to 24-year-old experience in many, many ways. There's a joke that all psychological research is done on college sophomores, so why would it be applicable to anybody? And I'm like, yeah, I know. I have college students. It's applicable to everyone here. But we pulled out the research that talks about second heart attacks and optimism. We pulled out the research that involves divorce and relationships, because when you're 18 or 19 or 20, you glaze over when someone starts to talk about those things. They don't apply. But when you start talking about GPA, you start talking about social experiences in college and creativity, performance in sport and performance in music, when you start talking about engagement and passion and things that we know they're interested in, in part because we've asked them, sure. Then you can see those eyes light up. You can see them wanting to know more. And we also do assignments. We assign projects that are actionable. That is to say, they have their papers throughout the semester. They have their final. They have their project. But every week, they have an experiential assignment. That is to say, an empirically sound, scientifically sound assignment, such as go home and every night take 10 minutes to write 3 things you're grateful for in a journal and why you're grateful for them. Right? And at the end of the week, when you've done this, write a 1 to 2 page paper on what your experience was. Right? We have a different one every week. So they can go throughout their semester and explore some of these sound interventions that can really, really help them. And when they feel change, there's nothing quite like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I know your classes are really, really big. I mean, we're talking several hundred students at a time. Can you share maybe one student story with you that somehow they were really touched or impacted by being in that class and that, shared that with you?
Yeah. Gosh, it's how do you choose? There's some really wonderful stories. I had a student last semester 2 semesters ago, who was an incredibly gregarious young man. We chatted quite a bit, and before class, after class, really interesting fellow, an interested fellow. And towards the end of the semester, well, the very last class of the semester, people come up and they thank us. We chat. It's a really wonderful, kind of bittersweet moment because we know we're not going to see a lot of them again. And this fellow, we'll call him Joe, kind of stood out to the side. And some people do that. They wait. They want a moment. They want some quiet. They want a little interpersonal, more intimate conversation. And he waited and he waited and he waited until the very end. And then he walked over, and I could see in this young man who had always been so joyous in a way, bouncy. There was something on his mind, and he came over and said that he had been incredibly successful all throughout his young life, all throughout high school in musical theater. His parents were both professional musicians, and it was clear that this was the path that he was meant to go on. He always got the lead in high school, and he came to NYU specifically for that pursuit. But he realized after he'd been there that while he was doing it and he was successful at it, it wasn't really bringing him the pleasure that it used to. He felt like he was missing other things in his life. He had run track in high school. He was missing that movement. He used to play guitar, and he was missing that too because the demands were so heavy. And he thought, maybe this is not necessarily the right path for me. So what he had done in the middle of the semester is he had gotten back to running with an intramural team, and he had picked up the guitar again, and he decided to step away. But the challenge to stepping away from musical theater was telling his parents, because they had such high hopes for him. And he had been incredibly worried about what they would think, what they would say, how they would handle it. And he told me that he finally went to them and shared what was on his mind, really told them what was happening, and that they completely embraced it and said, look, Joe, the most important thing for us is that you're happy. Not what gets you there, but that you're happy. And he teared up a bit, and so did I. And the idea that he could understand and go to his folks and have this conversation, and also bring them some evidence of talking about passions that we explored in class, talking about meaning that we had explored in class, talking about purpose that we explored in class, was incredibly helpful. So, the last thing he said was, I'm happier now than I have been in a long time. And that was one of the highlights of the last 5 years, easy.
I could see that. My guess is so many of us have probably been in that situation where we're afraid we're going to disappoint someone by saying, I don't want to do this. So maybe it's a good lesson for all of us that if you're on the receiving end of that message, how important it is to say, hey, you're more important than that.
Yeah.
It's really powerful. We have a lot of people here, and I'm sure people want to ask questions and have a chance to hear from you. I want to ask one final question at this part, and I'm going to go back and kind of end it the way I started it, which is with family. You have a 9-year-old boy, Julian, okay? If I was here with Julian and interviewing him and saying, you've observed your dad, what have you learned from your dad that you think is most important? What do you hope that Julian will say?
Gosh, that's a tough one. I would hope that he would say what I would say about my parents, which is that no matter what he does, I support him in it, and I love him, win or lose, and that I tell him how proud I am of him for doing those things that are most important to him, those things that he loves. I think it's that unconditional support that I would hope he would say, and it's certainly what I got from my folks.
I hope someday I get a chance to interview Julian because I've got a feeling
Be
won't
great
be far
interview, I
off
gotta
from
tell
that. Okay. we're going to now go to the part where we give you a chance to ask Dan some questions. I'm sure some of the points he's made probably connects with you in a very personal way. There's Josh with the microphone. We ask that you go to the microphone so we can all hear you. And since we have so many people here, if we could sort of just keep it to one question per, so we might be able to get as many people as possible asking a question. So if you're ready, just see Josh.
Hi, Dan. I have a question about early childhood, and specifically the way that you're talking about well-being and happiness and success, and that our culture socializes children to specialize early. And how can we make sense of that in terms of the scheduling and the diminished opportunities for play and exploration and failure within those contexts? And how do you see a relationship there? I'm really curious about your perspective.
Sure. No, I appreciate the question. What is your name? I'm sorry.
Meg.
Meg? Thank you, Meg. So I think that's such a pertinent question because we were having this conversation before about specialization. And it can be a real challenge. It's funny, it's the second conversation and not the first question I've gotten today about specialization in early childhood. So what I would say is that if a kid finds something that they really love, then the 4 words that I use, I take them from a colleague of mine, Angela Duckworth, is choose easy, work hard. And I give a simple example of like Legos. If your kid loves Legos, then help them play with Legos and challenge them a bit when it comes to Legos, right? I think a lot of parents go, look, Legos are great, but you really need to learn how to speak French. Legos are great, but you really need to learn your math. Legos are great, but right? Because what are you gonna do with Legos, right? But instead of that, saying, great, so let's get you some more Legos, and hey, this is a picture of a building in Paris. It's called the Eiffel Tower, or whatever their level is, and say, let's do this together, and sort of challenge them to embrace that. So if they find something they love, wonderful. If they don't, and it's like drawing and playing in the dirt and playing on the playground and playing with their friends, and one is worried they don't have a specialization, don't push them in a certain direction. Like we said about passions, they'll come. They're doing what they're interested in. That idea of playing in the mud, who knows what that'll become? Legos may become architecture. They may not. But the fact is that we're helping them, we're supporting them to do something that they're really passionate about. I think that's totally key. Now, then the question comes up, if they do find something and they're super focused, like my little boy, and he's at gymnastics 16 hours a week now, he's 9, and he loves it. But I certainly find that he became far better, far healthier, dealing with failure, for example, losing, when he had other things in his life. So the fact that he was also playing baseball, that he was also singing, that he had other interests, that he loved to read, meant that if he didn't do as well in a tournament as he had hoped, well, tomorrow's a baseball game. And Monday's an audition for an acting gig, right? So he had other things that are important. The idea behind harmonious passion is that almost nobody has harmonious passion. The healthy passion has only one. They have multiples, because that means there's other stuff happening, and that's really, really important. Yeah, sure.
Hi, my name's Roberto Benzo. I'm a PhD student here.
Nice to meet you.
I want to thank you for coming, first of all.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for the University of Iowa making me feel at home for 3.5 years. So I'm not from here. I'm international. But one of the books that changed my life was Happiness Advantage by Sean Anker a while back ago. It started teaching me to be grateful for some of the things. But it wasn't until I read things like the Mindfulness or Search Inside Yourself by Tang from Google that kind of taught me to be forgiving to myself and accepting, which kind of facilitated a little bit of the happiness and to be positive every day. My question is to you, are there any other factors that you believe can lead us to be more positive or to be happier?
So that's a great question. Thank you, Roberto. Appreciate that. So let me make something, make a distinction here, which is our class is called The Science of Happiness. But as we tell the students, maybe the first or second class, it's not really about the science of happiness. But if we called it the science of well-being, we'd have like 13 students, right? Happiness is one factor. Right? Let's call it positive emotions are one factor. When it comes to well-being or flourishing or thriving, the idea of really living a life worth living, there are multiple factors. So the way that Marty Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania his theory is called PERMA, P-E-R-M-A, which stands for positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement. And the idea is, let's pretend each one is a bucket. They don't all have to be overflowing. But if you don't have at least a drop in each one, it's really hard to be thriving. So let's say that you do have great positive emotion, but you don't have much meaning in your life. It's hard to be thriving. Let's say you have great accomplishment or achievement, the A, but you have no one to share it with, the R. It's really hard to be thriving. So the idea is we need to cultivate something in each bucket in order for us to really be deeply fulfilled in our lives. And that being said, this is a theory. There are other factors. And you mentioned mindfulness, and I think that's incredibly important. The studies that are coming out of mindfulness are so strong in terms of how they can help us deal with stress, have greater positive emotion, cultivate better friendships, so on and so forth, that's a tremendous factor. The other thing that's important, I think, for everyone here, everyone who's listening, is that there is no one way to thrive. So I tell my students this, and I will tell you the same thing, and it is the cheesiest line I use all semester, and you will probably groan when you hear it. But I look at my students and I say, you are all beautiful little snowflakes, right? And they, as they should, groan. But the idea is relationships are incredibly important to you, and emotions a little less. For you, it's meaning, and accomplishments a little less. For you, and it's an infinite array. So finding what works for you is integral. But the idea is when you have these buckets and you can look to them, you have a better chance of being able to realize that fulfilling, thriving life.
Great.
Yeah, sure.
This lady had a question.
Oh, did you have a question? Yeah. Okay.
So I do research on hearing loss, and I've been very unhappy with all of the quality of life scales that people have been using for years. So I developed a new questionnaire I call the meaning of life. And so I gave this to 200 people and did an analysis of what the primary factors were. The third and fourth factor were physical well-being and emotional well-being, which was probably predictable. But the two primary factors, the second factor was having friends to share problems and to share joys. That could be a partner, it could be a parent, I suppose, but having a relationship with somebody. And the primary factor for the meaning of life was to be able to look forward to the future.
Yeah.
So even if your hearing was getting worse or if you had other challenges, as long as you could think about next week and next year, about having a positive feeling about that, that was one of the main factors that contributed to the meaning of life in my work.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I'd love to see the work that you're doing. Marty Seligman has been looking at exactly that, the idea of how do we think about the future and how does that affect our well-being? That's what he's been looking at for the last couple of years. Relationships, what we found in almost every measure is that they're the number one factor when it comes to our ability to thrive. For exactly the reason you said, because if I'm having a really rough day, I want to turn to someone, a friend, a parent, anyone, a colleague I feel close with, and say, I'm having a rough day, or I bombed a test, whatever it might be, and the stress is diminished. But we also want to be able to celebrate those good things. I'm having a great day, and we want to be able to relive those experiences. So relationships are essential. Maybe, it's tough to say it's more important than anything else, but we find in so many studies that it's number one. But you're right on the cutting edge, because as we said, Seligman is looking at just that, which is looking into the future. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Linnea Ethington. I'm a licensed psychologist, so I work at the Counseling Center with undergraduate students, and I also teach a first-year seminar in positive psychology. So
Cool.
I'm really glad
We got to talk.
So my question is kind of two parts for both of those hats. One is, I see a lot of students in my work that feel pressure to be happy. So there's that idea, like, if I'm not happy, then I'm doing something wrong. And then connected to the research that shows, like, the quickest way to be not happy is to pursue being happy. That, right? The pursuit of meaning is the key, and then happiness will usually come along with it. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little to how you talk with undergraduates about that in your course, but then also that idea that being happy in and of itself can be a pressure and stress if you're not.
Right. Well, I mean, there's so many books, and most of them are not empirically sound, that say you can be happy. We can all be happy. We should all be happy. That in itself is pressure, right? When we look at, and let's just stop and think about the answer from before, which is if we just think about those 5 factors, emotions, engagement, relationship, meaning, and achievement, only 20% of that is positive emotion, right? So helping them understand that there are other factors that can add to their well-being, that can add to their thriving, is essential. Now, meaning peaks at 2 times in life. The search for meaning peaks at the age of 18 and the age of 65. So, most people are surprised by that. They think, what's going to happen later in life? I mean, 18-year-olds are not looking for meaning. The fact is, they are looking for meaning. Because what does meaning really mean? Meaning, one definition, which we tend to use, is that I feel connected to the world around me. And that gets back to the idea of how can I contribute? How can I give? So you don't necessarily have to be happy when you're giving back. It can just be deeply meaningful. When we look at things we're engaged in, the idea of flow or being in the zone, the definition of it has no emotion. So for people here who have ever gotten sort of lost track of time, they're reading a book, they're doing a hobby, they're running, they're doing something that they're super engaged in, and all of a sudden they go, where'd the time go? Or they don't hear the phone go off or something like that. That's engagement. And Csikszentmihalyi, the researcher that who really started working on this, said there are no emotions attached. When you lose track of time, you're not happy, you're engaged, right, in something that's really fascinating. So when we think about meaning, connecting to something greater than ourselves, engagement, connecting to something that is really gripping for us, we think about relationships. Don't necessarily have to be happy relationships. They don't have to be relationships where you're always happy. They can be relationships that you find comforting, or that you find safe. And you think about achievement. It's not always necessarily a happy thing either. I mean, look, we can look at failure as an achievement. To say, I failed today, it's my chance to learn how to pick myself up. There are many, many other ways to go when it comes to happiness. And back to the buckets idea, for some of us, it's about positive emotion. But for many of us, it's not. So I think giving students ideas of other ways, A, the matrix of this is PERMA, and B, there are other ways that you can actually pursue in a healthy way, well-being. You don't find meaning unless you pursue it. Look for some meaning. Figure out what your strengths are via an assessment that we can chat about later, and use those every day. Cultivate those relationships, because by doing so, your well-being will go up. And all of those, including the healthy passion, we find are linked directly to higher levels of positive emotion. Right? Yeah.
My name's Nathan Meyer. I'm just a junior at Gina, so I got a ways to go.
Just a junior.
You obviously talk about you talk about success a lot. So I guess this one's short and sweet. But what's been your biggest success so far?
That's a good question, man. I remember you, Nathan. You've asked questions of me in the past. They're always so good and so hard. The easy answer for me, my greatest success in life is my boy. There's no doubt about that. And I don't think there's any way to recognize that until you have one. Doesn't have to be a boy, by the way, my child. But boys are particularly good. No, so no, it's my child. There's no doubt about it. It's a remarkable thing to be able to share the world with someone and to help raise someone in a way, at least for me, that allows them to really explore their passions and their loves and their happiness, and sort of learn to sit back. It's been a huge learning experience too. It's not success because I've been always successful at it. It's because I've found myself going, man, that was not a good parenting moment. This is a great opportunity to learn. How do I do this? So I'm constantly learning. But even then, it's a remarkable thing. So it would have to be. Yeah.
Hey, my name's Fanny,
Hi, Fanny.
and I teach undergraduates, and the thing that really stuck out with me is the thing you spoke of, that there's tons of studies now that undergraduates now more than ever are more stressed out, not happy, not thriving. And in the 7 years that I've been an adjunct professor here, I can see a change just even in that time, mostly in anxiety, I would say. And then you alluded to choice being maybe one thing that is causing some stress for people, but are there other factors that you could say, right now might be influencing this sort of decline in thriving that's happening right now?
I think there's so many. We could have a whole session on that, and then part two. So yeah, there's so many factors. The idea that we need to be something, whether it's need to be happy as you brought up before, or need to be successful, or need to be so many other things, need to be the best, are factors that I think have begun to weigh with increasing weight, with increasing challenge on students. So, as you said, the numbers are changing. In the past 3 years, I believe it's the past 3 years, number of college students who report anxiety has doubled. Why is that? Well, when I graduated from college, which wasn't that long ago, you guys, by the way, it was plenty of time ago. When I graduated from college, I remember one of my good friends said, I want to be a millionaire by the time I'm 30. I thought, whoa, that's amazing. Like, I mean, I'm going to classical music, so that's never going to happen for me, but that's amazing. And then a couple years later, I remember talking to some folks who were 10 years yet later saying, I want to be a millionaire by the time I'm 25. So what I tell a lot of my students is that Taylor Swift and Mark Zuckerberg, like, they ruined your life. Don't get me wrong, I'm fans of both of them. But what college students seem to find now is that if they are not millionaires, at least for many of them, not all of them, if they're not millionaires, they're not super successful, if they're not the best by the time they're 23 or 22, Zuckerberg did it in college, so by the time they're 21, then they've already failed. And that's a really challenging, that's an impossible thing to meet. So I think that's really become part of it, is the expectation that we need to be the best, expectation that we need to make the most, the expectation that's not always, clearly it's not intrinsically driven, it's from the culture around them that's really bringing them down. So that idea of pursuing something that you're passionate about, that you're intrinsically motivated to be passionate about, I think has a profound effect on their ability to thrive. And I'll give you sort of one quick example. It's a 2015 Gallup poll that looked at graduates who had finished college between 5 and 10 years previous and were, by all measurements, thriving in their lives, personally, professionally, so on and so forth. What were the factors in college that they believed allowed them to thrive now, 5 to 10 years after graduation? And the number one answer was, I had a professor who cared about me as a person. Number two answer was, I had a mentor who shared my interests. It wasn't about the fact they were the best in college. It was about the idea that they were human beings who were pursuing things that they were deeply engaged by, that they might have even been passionate about. So back to the question of positive emotions, is it about cultivating that, or is it about, and even back to the question of mindset that Nick asked, or is it about what you can do that you find engaging, what you can do that you look forward to growing in? Because by doing that, you take the pressure off of having to be the best. You take the pressure off of those measurements that are almost impossible to meet. Yeah.
Thank you for all this wonderful information. My name is Resmiye. I'm a child abuse prevention pediatrician working at the hospital here. One thing that I am observing, and I believe that relationships are the core to happiness at every turn in our lives, starting from childhood on. What I am observing is that obviously digital media, all kinds of media, are taking over our lives from childhood to adulthood, including myself. People are going out to dinner, they're checking their cell phones, checking Google instead of talking to one another, and even posting messages on Facebook to one another when they're just sitting together. But from a childhood perspective, what scares me is young people, unfortunately, are using digital media more and more as babysitters, giving the cell phone to a 2-year-old with a video game or whatever it may be. So I'm worried that the kids are going to forget to play normally out in the nature, outdoors, etc. And with some young people at least, I am seeing that parent-child relationship is being impaired with digital intervention or interference. So how can we turn this toward positive? Because it's here and it's not going anywhere. What can we do to use this digital medium to make people happier?
Yeah. If I had the answer to that, I'd be a rich man. So it's a great question, and you're asking one where the research is increasingly robust, but we're still needing to find out much more. When we look at studies of the effect of social media on parent-child relationships even. Sherry Turkle at MIT has looked at this quite a bit. It's really fascinating. Even something as simple as, she did a study on dinner table conversation. If the phone is anywhere within sight, even if it's off, even if it's flipped upside down, if it's in sight, then the depth of the conversation is altered. Because people are almost expecting, because we have that, almost like that addiction that I can grab it, or I can Google something rather than having a conversation. So, Irresistible, which is a book by Adam, I think it's Alton, I'm sorry, at NYU, that just came out, is about social media and what the issues are that we're facing. So, I think that almost like traditional psychologies, what we've been looking at primarily is how do we deal with the issues that come up? How do we help the kids and the parents and everyone else who's in here deal with the challenges to well-being that social media presents? What is next, and what we're starting to look at, and I have a couple colleagues who are just beginning to look at it, is your question. How do we use these to promote well-being? And that's the other half of the equation. If we look at psychology as having focused on dealing with illness and challenge for many years, and now positive psychology for the past 20 years is looking at how to cultivate wellness, we almost have a similar arc when it comes to social media. We're looking at all the challenges, we're just trying to look at how to use it for well-being. So I think that research is emerging, but it's out there and it's picking up speed. Yeah.
Great questions and interaction. This will be the last one.
I will stick around, by the way, and I am happy to hang out and answer
Yeah.
questions. So, please come on up afterwards.
Well, I feel a lot of pressure because of that, but I'll put it aside. I'm a professor here. I love my students, and a lot of times I find that the thing that holds them back is their own sense of shame. I know that sounds really weird. I found that shame is even more destructive than, shame is just like the big joy killer, the big motivation killer. And I just wanted to know, you mentioned a phrase, barriers to well-being, and I would love to hear your thoughts on really common barriers to well-being, because I think this could help all of us.
Right. So, shame is huge, and clearly, if people here are interested in the idea of shame, Brené Brown is a remarkable researcher who's written on shame and a great writer. So have a look at her work. So the way we design our class is, and I'm so glad you asked that question, because we've been talking a lot about well-being. We've been talking a lot about happiness, but how to cultivate that in our lives. But the one thing we really haven't touched on is challenges, and it would be unfair. It would be to not bring those up, right? In our course, we don't just talk about happiness. About 75% of our course is how to cultivate well-being, but about 25% of our course is how to deal with the challenges to well-being, because if you don't deal with those, you're not being realistic. Right? So what we have our classes on optimism and positive emotion and positive relationships and engagement and flow and meaning. We also have classes on stress. We have classes on cognitive behavioral therapy. We have classes on mental health, because we want to be very clear with students that 18 to 24 is peak time for onset mental illness, and that 50% of people are going to deal with mental illness in some capacity in their lives. So the idea of going to the mental wellness center should be embraced. You are not the only one in the room. In fact, what we do really early on, maybe even the first class this semester, is we ask who here has been stressed out at some point in college. And 90% of the hands raised, which is very similar to what we find in studies. But it's not because I want to know. We have 475 students in there. I can't track them all. It's because I want them, when they raise their hand, to look around and realize, wow, I am not the only one. And matter of fact, the majority of people in here have felt stressed out. When we asked who's felt anxious, 75%, 80% of the hands go up. It's not for us. So they look around and go, oh, wait a second, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who feels anxious. So the opportunities to address those are essential if we're going to have well-being. We can't ignore those. And so understanding how we can, in some cases with stress, how do you reframe stress? I'll give you a simple study that was done, I believe, at Harvard, where students were given, who were about to take a test, were given a paragraph to read through. And in one case, the paragraph talked about it being, their stress being nerves, right? So I'm nervous about something. And they were asked to say, I am nervous about something. And in the other case, very similar, but they just changed the word nerves to excitement. I'm excited about something. So by reframing the stress, they ended up performing far better on the tests that followed, right? So in some cases, it's helping them simply reframe what's going on. We've all been anxious. We've all been stressed out. How we deal with it ends up dictating how resilient we are, how we react to these things. So in the case of stress, it can be something as simple as that. I think often having people talk about it or understand simply what the data is, because what we teach is not prescriptive, it's descriptive. And once a student knows that 90% of them are stressed, that 30% of them are going through work-debilitating depression, they feel a little more comfortable knowing they're not the only ones on campus. So, there are all these barriers, and there are ways to deal with them. When is it okay to go to your friends? When do you, for stress or depression? When is it okay to go to your parents? What are some indicators that it's time for you to go see a professional? And so once they understand that, they at least have something to measure it by and know, I got to talk it out with my dad or my mom, or it's time to go to the wellness center, right? So that's how we try to do it, and that's what we do. And this is not a shill for the book, but to be very clear, there are chapters that are about challenges to well-being, the barriers to well-being, and we try to help students understand they're not alone. There are things they can do, and absolutely they can move forward with those. Yeah, sure.
Dan, thank you for being on the window. Especially thank you for the uplifting messages and the work that you bring, but also your sincerity really comes through.
Thank you.
Could you help me
Thank
thank
you for having
Dan
me.
Lerner?
Thank you.